So of course we're here today to ask the MMTIC Expert with our dear friend Dr. Elizabeth Murphy, who's the co-author of the Murphy-Maeskire Type Indicator for Children. That assessment is published by the Center for Applications of Psychological Type, and my name is Rob Rothschild, and I'm the Marketing Director here at CAPT, and we are so proud to be the publisher and best friend of the MMTIC assessment, where we say that every child is appreciated, every child is engaged. And Elizabeth is going to start off with the first question that we let you guys know in the invitation, which is, what happens when students, teachers, and parents have the same or opposite preferences? And take it away, Elizabeth.
All right, thank you so much. Actually, I would like to begin, if you don't mind, reading a tiny story, because I think it puts the frame for how we want people to respond, whether you are the same preferences as the adult child or you're different. Some of you might be familiar with this myth since it's been around a while, but it's called the King Arthur story. Young King Arthur was ambushed and imprisoned by the monarch of a neighboring kingdom. The monarch could have killed him, but was moved by Arthur's youth and ideals. So the monarch offered him freedom as long as he could answer a very difficult question. Arthur would have a year to figure out the answer. If after a year he still had no answer, he would be put to death. The question, what do women really want? Such a question might perplex even the most knowledgeable man, and to young Arthur it seemed an impossible query. But since it was better than death, he accepted the monarch's proposition to have an answer by year's end. He returned to his kingdom and began to poll everybody, the princes, the prostitutes, the priests, the wise men, the court jester. He spoke with everyone, but no one could give him a satisfactory answer. Many people advised him to consult the old witch. Only she would know the answer. The price would be high. The witch was famous throughout the kingdom for the exorbitant prices she charged. The last day of the year arrived, and Arthur had no alternative but to talk to the witch. She agreed to answer his question, but he'd have to accept her price first. The old witch wanted to marry Gawain, the most noble of the knights of the Round Table and Arthur's closest friend. Excuse me. Young Arthur was horrified. She was hunchback and hideous, had only one tooth, smelled like sewage, made obscene noises. He had never encountered such a repugnant creature. He refused to force his friend to marry her and have to endure such a burden. Gawain, upon learning of the proposal, spoke with Arthur. He told him that nothing was too big a sacrifice compared to Arthur's life and the preservation of the Round Table. Hence their wedding was proclaimed, and the witch answered Arthur's question thus: what a woman really wants is to be in charge of her own life. Everyone instantly knew that the witch had uttered a great truth and that Arthur's life would be spared, and so it was. The neighboring monarch granted Arthur total freedom. What a wedding Gawain and the witch had! Arthur was torn between relief and anguish. Gawain was proper as always, gentle and courteous. The old witch put her worst manners on display and generally made everyone very uncomfortable. The honeymoon hour approached. Gawain, steeling himself for a horrific experience, entered the bedroom. But what a sight awaited him! The most beautiful woman he had ever seen lay before him. The astounded Gawain asked what had happened. The beauty replied that since he had been so kind to her when she appeared as a witch, she would henceforth be her horrible, deformed self half the time, and the other half she would be her beautiful maiden self. Which would he want her to be during the day, and which during the night? What a cruel question! Gawain pondered his predicament. During the day, a beautiful woman to show off to his friends, but at night, in the privacy of his home, an old witch? Or would he prefer having by day a hideous witch, but by night a beautiful woman with whom to enjoy many intimate moments? What should he do? So after a moment, noble Gawain replied that he would let her choose for herself. Upon hearing this, she announced that she would be beautiful all the time because he had respected her enough to let her be in charge of her own life. I love that myth because I really think that's what children want even. They want to be in charge of their own life. And the more we can give them the tools to be able to do that through type awareness, the easier it is going to be for them to discover in this lifetime who they are and who they are not. Which doesn't mean offering them every chance to make every decision. But it does mean in those millions of little decisions that we tend to make for children, if we could defer and let them make the choice, it would give them that empowerment. So that this mix and match is to describe some of the differences, but to also keep that frame in mind that one of our goals, one of our objectives is to empower our children to make good, wise decisions. And I think this came to mind because I had a woman speak with me recently, and she was so upset at the temper tantrum that her child had thrown because the child would not wear the outfit that the mother had picked out for school pictures. The mom knew that the outfit that the mom picked out was prettier, more appropriate, more whatever, but it wasn't what the child wanted to wear in the pictures. So the child threw a temper tantrum, the parent took it as disobedience, and from disobedience then went to consequences, which then made for an unhappy mom and an unhappy child. So in a situation where most likely what they're going to wear to school may not be a perfect match, but it still is probably not offensive, giving them the autonomy, the freedom to make that choice, rather than how late can I stay up at night when they would not necessarily make a wise choice, is when we as parents or adults working with children have to use some of that discernment to know when is this a time to empower them with that freedom to be the one choosing, and when do I need to ask them to just follow the direction. I saw another example this week on YouTube that kind of took the other end. The little girl was crying and screaming, and she was little, like in terms of 8 or 9 years old. She wasn't young little like 2 or 3. And she wanted to buy a toy. And her dad said, no, you need to put it back. And she said, I want the toy. And he said, no, put it back. And she said, I want the toy. And then instead of recognizing that this is a moment when the child should go into obedience, it should just be active listening first. You really wish that I would just buy you that toy. But I made the rule, no toy today. And that's the rule we'll follow. Instead, he tried to bargain with her like, but your grandma was going to buy you a toy this weekend, and you'll get another toy on this. And, oh, I know, we can get a toy at the checkout counter. All of those options that he was offering the child were actually all inappropriate because they basically said the parent made a rule, but the child had the right to override that rule by being rude. And that's certainly what we don't want to happen. We want to use type to give children better tools without diminishing the role responsibility that comes between the parent and the child. So,
hey, Elizabeth, can you give an example?
So that's what I wanted to start with.
Can you give an example? Can you hear me, Elizabeth?
I can.
I was just going to say, could you give an S and N, a sensing and intuition example, or a judging, perceiving example? You know, something that we can glom onto for one of those dichotomies. Sure.
A real common JP one is the J parent wanting the child to do the homework right away, and the perceiving child wanted to delay getting the homework done. So let's assume it's the weekend, and the J parent is saying, you need to get this homework done so you can relax the rest of the weekend, so you need to do it tonight. And the perceiving child going, no, I don't really need to, I don't really want to. No, you need to get the homework done tonight so you can relax. Don't you want to rest and enjoy the rest of the weekend? Well, what the J parent is doing inadvertently is giving the perceiving child their approach to the homework. And the perceiving child is filtering that information and going, no, that's not true. I can relax without having the homework done tonight. So they're discounting the authenticity of the parent's comment. When in reality, if the parent had phrased it more accurately, it would have been, I have to check your homework, and I can't relax and enjoy my weekend until that job is done. So I need you to do your homework tonight so that I can relax and have a wonderful weekend too. Then the need for getting the homework done belongs to the parent, not to the child. But I firmly believe most children will respect that and say, okay, Mom, I'll do that for you. But when we try to impose that thought onto the child, you need to do this, when it doesn't match what they're internally processing, they just discount our ability to truly understand them. So that would be one example, Rob. Does that help?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
It does, absolutely.
Sure you heard me.
Oh yeah, I heard you. Yeah. I just know that's a question that we get a fair amount of times when people want to dive into the dichotomy. So thank you. That's a good one. I have one question from someone here who asks, and I just asked if she wanted to ask her question verbally. She wrote it in. Maria asks, what are some suggestions for those who are first starting out as an MMTIC facilitator?
Are you looking, Marie, for suggestions on facilitating with the child, with the parents, with the class, with the teacher? Can you share a little bit more about who you want to work with on the type concepts? Or do you mean generically, how do you basically begin finding work as a type facilitator?
Maria, can you hear me? Can you speak?
Yes, I can.
Great.
I think I'm really relating to the first-time facilitator as in getting started.
With the students, you mean?
Which would be somebody working, basically trying to get the assessment in place, whether it's for families or whether it's for schools. Mm-hmm. What kinds of suggestions do you have for these first-timers?
Okay. Well, I'm going to borrow one from the CEOs on a panel and their reaction with the MBTI. And they said, don't come to me telling me you've got the MBTI. Come to me telling me what the MBTI use is going to do for my company, for my team. So instead of just saying, I've got the MTIC but it's that two. What is it for? Is it going to be to focus on better learning habits? Is it going to be to focus on better relationships? Is it going to be for the child to have better self-awareness and maybe work with their siblings a little bit better? But you might want to be very clear and very specific about why you're bringing the tool to whatever group you're bringing it to. The other thing I find is that if you're working within the schools, embedding it into a current course is very nice and helpful. So a lot of them have leadership classes or study skills classes or even those general self-awareness classes throughout the middle school years and late elementary years. And if it became part of that course, where for 1 week or for one, you would really like to have a week if you had the option of working with a little bit of information each day, then you have a better chance of getting it clearly embedded into the organization that's going to be able to use it again and again. which means teachers have to be familiar with type concepts, whether through the MBTI for them, and then how do I apply that to my instruction in the classroom. And so you may need to start with the MBTI and the teachers working with how do I adjust instruction to honor that sensing learner or that intuitive learner, and then help them go into working it directly with the kids. The other way has been through PTA programs. At the end of March, we're going to be doing a program, all volunteer. I mean, it's not all volunteer, for the people will be paid and the students are paying, but they're doing the class on Saturday, so it's not a requirement from the school. But they're offering it to all their AP students and others who might be interested to just say, take the indicator and see if knowing yourself better will help you with making college choices, career choices, study choices. And that was just done through a parent organization that asked, could we host that for them? Could we sponsor? Could we offer that for their students? So some way there needs to be a way to let people know the value of what you're bringing to them, and then they'll be asking you for it. Okay. Is that what you were looking for?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Murphy.
Okay. I didn't know if you meant specifically about the content to use or that broader format. Okay.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, I have another written question here. Yes, and Carol, I'm going to unmute your mic. Can you hear us, Carol?
Yes, can you hear me?
You bet we can.
Carol, yes.
Hello, Dr. Murphy. It's very nice to speak to you. Okay, my question is that I'm having quite a bit of challenge with determining type in kids. And I've been working with kids anywhere from the age of 8 to 14. And I find that the assessment gives an indication of one type, and then when I go through the workbook that you've provided for teens and tweens, and we go through the exercises of I am a good student, and then discussing the second exercise, which is the difference between types, I am really getting tons of contradictory answers. So my question is this: how much of that is due to the forming personality, because they are trying out a lot of different things, that's part of what they should be doing, and how much of that is just due to maybe issues with the process? I'm not really sure. And when a child cannot decide, so one thing might say sensing, then all of a sudden it's intuition, then it's sensing again. I'm feeling that may be okay, and we just tell them things are forming, and you have years to figure it out. What is your helpful suggestions for that type of situation?
Okay, I'm going to make some assumptions here because I wasn't able to hear the first part. When it came back in was when you were starting to say that here's the question that goes with that. So I missed your intro. But are you saying that when you're giving feedback to a child that one day they might say that sensing is a preference for them and the next day they'd say that intuition is a preference for them? And
yes.
How do we deal with that?
Yes,
okay.
between the assessment, the I am a good student exercise, and the choice between the dichotomies, I have had kids really flip-flopping. It's very hard to tell what they really prefer.
Right. Sometimes when children are young, they're afraid to say no to anything because they're afraid that will mean an incompetent area for them, an area they cannot do. So very carefully using the language of first, then, with the functions. So with sensing and intuition, it's like, well, which one would you more likely do first, and then which would you do second? Because we all want to be able to remember the specific pieces and have wonderful new innovative ideas. But do you get your great, wonderful new innovative ideas by thinking about all the pieces first, or you go, oh, I know what we could do, and then put your energy into figuring out how to make that happen? So by using that first, then language, you take away that fear that I have to be everything. The other piece is that some very young children may still have all of that in the unconscious, and their auxiliary or even their dominant may not be clearly identified. And when that happens and they flip-flop between them, my answer is almost like, wow, you still get to explore, and until one of those just becomes your leading hand. Just like when children are younger, they use both hands until they figure out that one hand is just works for them easier and is one that they prefer. So they use both hands together, but they prefer one when they pick up a pencil or pick up a crayon. So what you're saying is you're still looking at, maybe I like to start with the pieces, or maybe I'd like to start with the main idea, and I'm still going to play with that until I figure out which one just feels best for me. But the only way that clarity comes is through the use of those functions. And the more children are just responsive and follow the rules and regulations, or follow the procedures, or do what we tell them, and they are not thinking independently, the less it's going to develop. So they're going to get to be older but not have had that chance. It's so critical. It's like if we teach you how to solve fractions or equations, and you follow all those procedures and get the exact right answer, you're using a part of your cognitive processing, but it's not related to taking in new information and then evaluating that new information using reason or importance. So when a person takes in that new information, it has to be through their perception process, through their eyes, not just taking what is provided for them. So if you look at a scene or you look at an image and you say, what do you recall from that? What do you notice about that? Or just tell me about that. We find that some people focused in on very specific pieces and tell you all of those. And then if you say, if you had to give a title to that, what title would you give it? Which is asking them to pull them into a pattern. But other people start telling you about, oh, I think this is this way and that is that way because blah, blah, blah. And you go, And what are the pieces in that picture that made you come to that conclusion? So do you see where one automatically went to whole idea, but then you have to probe to get the pieces? And the other person starts with pieces and you have to probe to get the whole idea? That's when one of those functions of sensing or intuition is becoming a driving force and the other one is getting ignored. So you have to use your questioning style to make it come back to activity. And in every case, when I watch some of the kids in class, they're wonderful about naming all the things they can. And when the teacher says, but what's the theme? They're like, what? What are you talking about? And other kids who get the theme, when they say, but tell me those specific reasons that support that theme. After they've named one or two, they're kind of stuck. But they know that's a good answer still. It's just that specificity wasn't filed in the direct way that a sensor would. An intuitive files it very indirectly, only as supportive data. So I would not be worried at all if the child isn't able to find closure. But I would be able to say to them, so let's figure out what things you might try over the next 6 weeks or semester or however long you want it to be. And notice when you are solving a problem or looking at something. Is your first concern the other person, or is your first concern whether it's fair? Or is your first concern that this was important to me, or is your first concern that it just doesn't make sense? It just doesn't make sense what you said. Sometimes young children can't realize they're using logical analysis, but it doesn't make sense to them, and that's all I can tell you is it just doesn't make sense because they're still exploring. And that's where I leave them as, you're still exploring, dear. And we can look at some games or activities, or we can look at just waiting in a couple of weeks and saying, what did you notice about that, about yourself? Because the ultimate goal is self-awareness. So even asking them to tune in to their own way of processing and decision-making is a real asset for many people, because that young child is eager to do what you want them to do, and in deference to the authority or the person, there really is a power position that adults have with young children. They will sometimes stop their own thought process in order to figure out what you want me to think, do, or say, rather than doing their own independent thinking or their independent perceiving. So if that were a person I was going to work with on a more regular basis, I would probably pick one of those functions that they were confused about. Let's say it was perceiving. And I might just play, let's say, what I spy, what do you see? Tell me about what you see. And do it with like multiple pictures over time. And then after that say, let's look at what you noticed about each of these last 5 pictures. And what was your starting thought? And then what was some other thoughts that came to you after you had your starting thoughts? And then teach them how they're going to use both sensing and intuition. But one will be the foundation and that brings out the other one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Elizabeth, one thing I notice is that, to distill that really quickly, is that the 4-letter type is not the most important outcome of a verification session with a student.
No, the 4-letter type is nice if we get it, because it tells us where they are, but even seeing their 4-letter type doesn't tell us where they are developmentally. Because a child can understand and pick a 4-letter type preference clearly, because it's still so unconsciously driving them that they don't even see the other side. And so that some children, when they're developing their functions, will actually become aware of the duality of that and have a harder time, but it's actually a positive sign of development. It doesn't have to be a sign of pure confusion. That confusion could be coming from a good reason. So the clarity could be coming from no development or clear development. So we can't tell just by whether they identified 4 letters as accurate for themselves, whether that's a positive or a negative, until we work with the child more.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that, I know as a practitioner, that can really assuage some of our concern that Carol just had. I'm not getting the results. I'm not getting what I thought was the results. So that's good to hear. Mm-hmm. Our next question is from. Oh, go ahead, Elizabeth.
If I could add one thing, when a child is not clear for themselves, but from the verification process, they become clear about good normal differences, we're at least 10 steps ahead of where we were. Because then we're telling them, should you choose this side or this side, both of them would be wonderfully okay. And sometimes prior to coming into the verification, they really didn't know that. If their parents and other siblings are a type that is different than theirs, then they could have gotten some very indirect signals throughout their living days that, yeah, we love you, but you're not like us. Because we did have one family, they were all J's. There were 3 siblings, 2 were J's and 1 was P, and the 2 parents were J's. So that perceiving child had nothing about their daily life that verified their style as equally valid, unless the parent consciously made a point to let them know that. We love you, but oh my gosh, they just, So that kind of incidental comment sends the signal that we love you in spite of who you are, not because of who you are. And we want them to be proud of whatever preference is right for them. But sometimes their world doesn't give them that message. So the verification process at least opens the door that there are many other people in the world who share your similar perspective.
Thanks, Elizabeth. That's great to know. I've got a question from Paul here. Paul, can you hear us?
I can indeed, Rob. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Would you like to ask your question?
Yes, certainly. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Dr. Murphy. My question is, when a person undertakes the questionnaire, there are a number of purposes that it can be used for. I'm afraid I don't have the questionnaire in front of me, so I cannot recall them. But you stipulate what the purpose of the questionnaire is. I'm interested to know what impact and how much of an impact that choice has in terms of the resulting report. Does that make sense?
If I'm hearing you accurately, I wouldn't be telling the child the purpose of the questionnaire.
No,
I would be telling that to the people bringing the tool into their organization, to their school, to their family. For the child, I would say this is a set of questions that help you sort your best ways of thinking, your best ways of getting information, and your best ways of forming relationships. So I would give them all three of those tools as reasons for completing the indicator.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. But when I fill the form in, it asks me for what purpose the questionnaire is going to be used for. There's a menu of about 7 or 8 different choices. Does that have an impact on how the resulting report is written? So if I was to answer,
I can jump in there, Paul, and tell you that that's purely for gathering information. You're talking about in the MMTIC facilitator interface when you set up a group.
That's right, yes.
Yeah, that has no bearing on the scoring of the assessment.
Or the way the report's written.
Absolutely correct. No bearing at all.
Okay.
No, the report is the same for the child always. But the report then was inclusive to give them suggestions for relationships, studying, and kind of being alert to when they might be getting into trouble for certain things.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
It's a good question.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. That's for us to gather information about how people are using the assessment, but it doesn't affect the student experience.
Okay.
Let's see, Elizabeth, no one else has posed a question right away except one person asked about certification, and I'll just take this moment to let everyone know that you can always check the CAPT website if you want to learn more about MMTIC certification. But if I'm saying your name right, Trigena, probably not, I'll send you information about that. If no one else has a question, I have one that I thought of, Elizabeth, when you were talking about the mixing and matching, and that is, how does all that preparation for giving the assessment change when you're working with students who might have a learning disability? Is there anything different that a facilitator might do?
No, because no matter whether they have a learning disability or not, they still have these preferential ways of processing. The only difference would be if the learning disability is in the area of reading and the child might need you to read the questions to them. But if you do read the questions to them, you should be a neutral party, not a parent. The teacher is, I wouldn't even use the teacher, I get a different person. And that's just simply so that if you had an inherent bias, the child wouldn't become sensitive to it. Whereas somebody who's neutral and doesn't know the child really, that's just going to be a person to read to, versus if I know you and know you well, I might indirectly influence your answer. Like I could see a person going, are you playful or organized? and laugh, meaning like we all know you're playful. Well, you've told the child what to choose. So that's why I would ask somebody neutral to do that. But in terms of could their learning disability impact how they might score on the indicator for these preferences, the only impact it could have right now would be in the area of reading, but it wouldn't impact the other pieces.
Great, thank you. That's good to know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to verbally solicit anyone else who'd like to ask Elizabeth a question, because Elizabeth and I can carry on talking for hours, but this is really a forum for you, everyone who has attended here, to ask. Looks like Paul has a follow-up question here. Good. Paul, you're back on. Can you hear us, Paul?
Thank you. Yeah, well, my other question was, I can indeed. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Go for it.
Hello? Oh.
We hear you. Proceed.
Can you hear me, Dr. Murphy? Okay.
Yes, I can.
When I originally undertook my MBTI, I struggled to identify my S and N preference. And I then became an MMTIC facilitator, and I undertook the MMTIC as if I was an 11-year-old. And I did that, and I got 100% clarity on my S and N, and it helped me understand what my true type was. Now, is this a methodology you've heard of before, or was it just fluke, or should I put no faith in it at all?
Well, you need to put it in faith for you. I mean, it worked for you to help you recall and remember how you were in those younger years. But I also know someone who told me that during their growing up years, they acted like a perceiving child because they thought that's what the family needed them to be. And when they became an adult, they really realized that judging and planful was a much calmer, easier way for them to control stress in their life and to organize their world. So if you were a child who was able to be whomever you wanted, then going back to an age like 11 might be a very lovely way of determining what was I in those years and helping to give some clarity if there's confusion later on. When we taught the MTIC certification course live, that was one of the things that everybody did, is they all took the indicator as pretending that they were children. And the degree of congruence between how they scored as a child and how they scored as an adult was very high. And when it wasn't the same, we would almost always have the adult be able to say, I know why I was like that as a child, or I know why I wasn't able to develop that part of me as a child. And it wasn't until adulthood that I was able to come into true ownership of my thinking or of my feeling, whatever those were. So I don't know that it's unique to you, but I'm very glad to hear that it was helpful for you to take that and use that process to discover who your real preferences were. Because in the end, we know we have all of them. We have all four of the functions. But that order does make a difference, especially in children. So as an adult, with this mix and match idea, I'm really eager to have many adults who work with children be able to become type wise in the choices that they offer kids, so that they can say to them, you could do it this way or you could do it this way. And that the child would be able to choose which one matched them best, but the choices would be a sensing choice and an intuitive choice, a thinking choice or a feeling choice, because sometimes they aren't always able to figure those out on their own. They need some examples.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Here's a good question in that vein exactly from David. David, can you hear us? Can you ask your question you want to ask? David Pierpoint, can you hear us? Okay, he's not responding. I'll read the question then, Elizabeth. David says, recommendation for helping an ISTJ parent to be accepting of their child who is 18 years old with an ESTP preference, and the child doesn't share the same sense of obligation to participate in religious community activities, quote, because she should. So recommendation for helping the parent to be accepting of this child.
Okay, to participate, is it only in that one particular vein, or is this generically to see how the ISTJ parents can appreciate the ESTP?
Well, Dave is asking in a specific situation here, so you might start
Can you hear me
there.
now?
Yeah. Oh, are you there, David?
Yeah, I couldn't get my audio to work, so I'm sorry.
You're in.
Okay.
We got you.
So I think it's more just the general sense that the parent, because of their own preferences, feels a certain sense and obligation to participate, even if she doesn't, necessarily want to. Whereas the ESTP child just doesn't feel that sense, and it doesn't seem logical to have to participate if she's not interested.
Yes, and that age of 18 is a very important element here, because as the parent you want to make sure that they're leaving with the values that the family has shared, and the child is changing their behavior, which may seem like a threat to, are they abandoning those family values when they're making their own decisions. But that age of 18 is an age when having the autonomy to make their own decisions is incredibly, incredibly important. It's funny because, I have an ESTP child also, older than 18, now an adult on their own. But I can remember having that same kind of argument about you need to still go with us to church, or you need to still go with us, and you need to finish and take your confirmation, and you need to blah, blah, blah. And he turned around and looked at me one day and he said, you don't get it. You need to quit worrying about whether I go to church. What you really need to worry about is, do I live a good life? I mean, a good Christian kind of giving, caring, serving kind of life. And it was like his way of telling me, which is that ESP, that it is the living and the doing and the actions that I take every day in my life that are most critically representative of me in terms of my beliefs and religious agreement, not whether I attended a service and sat there and thought of 9,000 things instead of even listening to what was going on. So you may have a child who is looking at that it's an action in life that's the critical piece, not just the participation in the rituals. But because of that 18, there is a time when they really do need to abandon the ways of the family in order to explore what have other families done, so that they can come back to wholeness and ownership of which way they want to live their life as independent adults. And as part of that process, we'll find a lot of people in that 16 to 18-year-old range who decide that it is, they're not going to serve the same way. They're not going to learn about God and religion and all the pieces that are important to the family in the same way that their parents did. They want to find their own way. It's funny because I had an ESFP parent and an ISTJ child, and the autonomy went the other way. The ESFP parent was throwing a big party for this child's confirmation, and the child comes down like the couple days before the confirmation and says, the pastor told us it's really private between me and God, and I'm not ready to be confirmed, so I won't go through the ceremonies. And the parent was like, oh, you're kidding me. How could you? We have relatives flying in from out of town for this. What do you mean you're not going through the ceremony? It's like, no, this is a private bond between me and God, and I'm not ready to make that commitment yet. I'm still thinking about it. And he felt the total autonomy. The mother felt the need to have him follow the social customs of the family, but he wanted the opportunity to make his own decisions in his own way. So in this particular case, it has to be one of those things where you say, is this a rule that I need to enforce? And if I feel I need to enforce it, then at least let the child know I'm doing this out of what I believe is my responsible obligation to guide you as a parent. And when I feel that time is up and it's your turn to make your decisions 100% independent of me, I will let you have that freedom. And I'm only going to ask that you respect my choice as a parent to make this a solid rule. Doesn't mean they'll like it, but you can have that right to do that as the parent. It's just recognizing the time in their life for autonomy, and to recognize and talk with them perhaps about, if church isn't the place where you meet this obligation, how in life would there be a place for you to find your spirituality, however it's going to be expressed? And maybe give some time to some dialogue that way so that they can broaden their awareness that you will see beyond the ritual and recognize what might be real for them right now. But it also could just be part of the challenge. So this is a tough one for you, because you're going to have to decide, is this important enough to me to make it a rule that I'm just going to ask you to respect? But make it that way. Not you need to have this as part of your life, but I need you to participate so that I can confirm I've met my parental role as I envision it. And when you're a parent, you will certainly have that same option. But this is where I am right now. So changing that language so that it's from your perspective.
Great, thanks.
That was an excellent question.
Yeah, thanks, David. That's a good one. I have one here from Julia Elizabeth, whose mic isn't working, so I'm going to read it. She says, I recently had a question from a parent. Her child has Asperger's and asked me if I was able to take her child through the MMTIC. Is there a proper way to answer her question?
If I have a child with Asperger's who's a high-functioning Asperger's and is able to read the items, I would absolutely say they would have an equal right to report their preferences, to learn about differences, and then to include in that discussion, if they're aware of their disorder, because some children are not yet advised of their disorder, but if they're aware of their disorder, to talk about how does your disorder impact some of your choices. But I wouldn't do that before they answer the question. I would do that after. So let's say, because I think some of the research, there's 3 studies, I believe, that have been done with Asperger's kids. And so they have an over-representation of J preferences, that need for structure and order and predictability. But we know that a lot of kids with Asperger's have that need for structure and order and predictability because of their language limitations. They don't want to be caught in the moment not knowing what's expected of them or what you are saying to them. And because they have a harder time reading the facial expressions and the bodily expressions of others, that complicates some interpersonal relationships. But they do have opinions about what they think is right and important. And I've had several long discussions with kids who were in high school, but they had that diagnosis. But they were debating the theory with me and talking with me about how it's expressed for them and what's going on. So their right to be exposed to the information and to have a self-report is great. If they confirm J and you question whether that's more of the sensing J being more of who they truly are or more of their need to structure the world because of their disorder, their neurological language processing kind of disorder, then you might suggest to them that they follow that as their operational style. But if they ever find it's not as much fun or it's draining their energy, how could they explore that other side? The child with Asperger's is very hesitant to risk the unknown, to say something when there's no data and proof for it. So those intuitive answers might be a bit frightening for them. But as long as they learn that their differences are existing and that they're okay to have that type, and it's okay to have a need for structure and how could they pull those together so that both can get some expression. But it might be one of those growth exercises where after the confirmation you say, if you wanted to just play with that intuitive side of you, and I gave you an option of these two ways of doing it, what might be one that you'd like to try this week? Almost like giving them a chance to taste that other function operating in them. They may be a genuine sensor, but if it was the Asperger's that was interfering with that process, and giving them those play explorations using that intuitive approach would give it some freedom to find out if it has any voice inside of them ready to be heard.
Thanks, Elizabeth. That's a great answer. We only have a few minutes left. I want to make sure this question gets in there because I think it's a good one from Patricia. Patricia, can you hear us?
I can. Yes.
Go ahead and ask your question, but turn down your whatever's going on there.
I'm not sure what's going on. Maybe we better mute this. There's music on my side coming through during your presentation, and
I think that's something on your phone. I'm not sure what it is.
actually, I thought all this time it was your music.
No,
not ours. Would you like me to read your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that music. I don't know where that's coming from. Patricia's question is, I can easily see the value to families where all siblings participate in taking the MMTIC, with perhaps the parents taking the MBTI. Have you administered these assessments for entire families, and if so, what suggestions do you have for the verification session that might enhance family communication? Lots to answer there for you, Elizabeth.
Yeah. I have done it with families, and I've done it in a very comfortable, relaxed kind of setting. So it would be that I would either go to their home or we'd go to a location. And in the last family that I remember doing it with, we had some very young children, like 6, 7, 8 years old, and then we had some that were 10, and then we had the parents. So what I would do is I would sit down and I would talk about the differences and mom's way and dad's way. And so after parents had verified their type, and children's way, and say, have you ever seen like this at your dinner table, or have you ever seen this happening? And we'd all come up with a couple of examples, and like, how can you let mom know when, and how can you let dad know when? Then after about 15 minutes, I would say, those who would like to take a play break can go take a play break, and those who would like to just ask some more questions can ask some more questions. So I didn't say, children, you're dismissed. So if the older child wanted to stay, and he did a couple of times, and the younger ones, of course, wanted to take that play break. And so we would talk then with the parents about more application strategies. Then when I was ready to go over the next difference, so if I started with EI, then I went on to JP, and then went to SN and TF. Everybody came back, and we sat down and have about 5 or 6 more minutes of input about the dichotomy differences. And have any of you seen this in your house, and have seen this in people in the house? And the kids are over, that one's more like daddy, or that one's more like mom. And mom would say, oh, and I think that one might be more like you, but it's like, which one do you think is true for you? And they would get it. And again, then I'd say those who'd like a play break are welcome to take a play break. And, and those who would like to keep talking, we can talk a little bit more. So it took an hour. It took a good hour. But we also we did it with a PTA group, we did it with a class, and the parents came in for a PTA session where we were describing the differences, and without telling the children why, without telling the parents why, the children would have their parents just say, I want you to line up on this side of the room and tell the other parent to up on this side of the room, whatever it was. And then we would describe the differences and would say, what do you think your preferences are? And they would note. And then all of a sudden, they would be like, wait a minute, almost everybody on our side is introverted, and everybody on the other side is extroverted. It's like, but the kids placed them there before the parent decided. It was the kid's observation that the parent got to verify first. And what it really helped them realize is we live our preferences. And when we live with each other, we learn about each other that way. We just don't always value some of those differences. And even when we do in our head, we don't every day in the moment. So I have had some J parents who at rushing to get kids out the door will be like, really? Really? You don't know where your things are? It's not like it's a surprise. We go to school every day at this time. Where are your things? Okay. Well, that's a parent not very much appreciative of the preceding style in that particular moment. What would be nice if they would stay in a frame, you know what? My J energy says I don't have any adapting energy left in me right now because my day is so busy. So I'm afraid that your style is not really best for me to enjoy in this particular moment. I'm going to go get in the car. You go find whatever you need, but the car's leaving in a couple of minutes or in 2 minutes. In other words, tell the kids that it's your energy that's too low to tolerate their major different style, so that the child can leave going, no, it was a mix, it was a mix, what is it, not a MIS match, rather than I'm at fault because something's wrong with me. The language we want the kids to hear is, we just didn't match today. Our differences just didn't work. And because of that, there was a bump, a clash, just a rub the wrong way. But we're still okay as independent people. We just didn't match up the way we had hoped.
If only there was more matching going on in the world, right?
It would be nice some days, wouldn't it? Well, I appreciate all of you who have taken the time to share your afternoon with me. It's a true honor and pleasure to be able to have this opportunity to talk about a topic that I believe is very important. And I certainly encourage you to ask questions at any time, even if they're not on our webinar. If you have questions and you want to send them in, there are ways to make sure that we can help you get the information you need.
Yeah, that's right. You guys can look at Type for Kids on Facebook. Elizabeth posts there regularly. On Twitter, we have videos on YouTube. You can visit typeforkids.org and, of course, capt.org for more information about the MMTIC and Type for Kids. And Elizabeth, thank you so much. Once again, I always learn so much at these webinars. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob, for all the organization. You make it so easy, and I appreciate that greatly.
Thank you, everyone, for attending and all the great questions. We're going to sign off now and keep an eye on your email. We'll be doing this again in a few months. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Have a good evening, all. Bye.
Bye, Elizabeth.